What was the first rock and roll record? Rocket 88? Rock Around the Clock? Do we trace the music back to Bill Haley and Elvis Presley, to Chuck Berry and Little Richard, or even Sister Rosetta Tharpe? What makes a rock and roll record? Just that, rocking and rolling. Certainly, rhythm and blues artists were singing about rocking and rolling long before the mid-50s and before radio DJs had given this music a name for the masses. And it may be a futile effort to try and determine the first rock and roll record or artist, but we can trace rock and roll and recognise some of the most important players in the development of rock and roll. And in doing so, we also find some of the most important songs in this development. In 1954, Atlantic was a new record label with something to say. With Jesse Stone writing and arranging, and Big Joe Turner behind the microphone, Atlantic Records released one of the most important tracks to kick off the rock and roll era, Shake, Rattle and Roll. Stone's song brought together rocking 12-bar blues, edgy lyrics, and a bold performance. And it could be imagined in a multitude of ways for artists like Bill Haley and his Comets and Elvis Presley. But the original, the one that kicked off all of their interpretations, was Big Joe Turner's Shake, Rattle and Roll. The story of Shake, Rattle and Roll has many players. We must begin with the two that started it all, Jesse Stone and Joe Turner. Jesse Stone was born on November the 16th, 1901 and raised in Kansas City. His music and performance career began at a very early age, as Stone began travelling and performing with his parents in variety shows as early as 5 years old. His parents also oversaw his musical training. In 1918, he formed the Blues Serenaders, the group which would eventually kick off Coleman Hawkins' career. In 1936, Duke Ellington heard Stone's band performing in Detroit and brought him to New York, where Stone worked as a band leader, songwriter and arranger. Stone recalled, "Duke was the one who turned me loose. He brought us to New York, got us booked into the Cotton Club. He gave me to Sidney Mills at Mills Music. Sidney signed me to Mills and booked me into theatres. It was quite a thing. We'd come from practically nothing out in the Midwest, and all of a sudden things were happening." Cole Porter encouraged Stone in his songwriting, and by 1942, Stone had his first big hit. His track, Idaho, was recorded by Benny Goodman's band and reached number 4 on the pop charts. That same year, he had another hit with Sorghum Switch, recorded by Jimmy Dorsey. In 1945, Stone and his friend Herb Abramson were working with Al Green at National Records, but dreaming of starting a record label of their own. However, neither had any money to get it off the ground. When Abramson met Ahmet Ertegun, things changed, and Atlantic Records was born. From the start, Stone was a major player at the label, and the first African-American on the payroll. He recalls that in those early days, they first tried to record jazz records, but realized that their audience wanted music they could dance to. When Atlantic first started at the end of 1947, we were trying to do jazz. The jazz didn't sell. We tried to analyze what was wrong. We eventually made a trip down south. Ahmet, Herb, and myself. We found that our music wasn't right because it wasn't danceable. The kids were looking for something to dance to. I listened to the stuff that was being done by those thrown-together bands in the joints down there, and I concluded the only thing missing from the stuff we were recording was the rhythm. All we needed was a bass line, so I designed a bass pattern, and it sort of became identified with rock and roll. Do-da-do-dum, do-da-do-dum. That thing. I'm the guilty person that started that. Stone wrote hit after hit for artists like Ruth Brown, Louis Jordan, Ray Charles, the Drifters, and the Clovers. In 1954, Stone was asked to write a song for Joe Turner, a fellow Kansas City musician who had also worked with Abramson at National Records before being signed to Atlantic. Joe Turner was born in Kansas City on May 18, 1911. Starting his career as a bartender at the age of 14. He earned a reputation as the singing bartender, a blues shouter who didn't need a microphone. Turner's bold stylings caught the attention of band leaders like Benny Moten, Andy Kirk, and Count Basie, who all brought Turner on tour at different moments in his career. In 1938, Turner, alongside the incredible piano talents of Pete Johnson, brought his blues singing to the famed Carnegie Hall concert From Spirituals to Swing. That same year, the pair wrote and recorded Roll and Pete, which has been credited as one of the most important tracks contributing to the development of rock and roll, and was later inducted into the Blues Hall of Fame.
Rolly boy, let 'em jump for joy. Yeah, man.
Both Turner and Stone worked in the Kansas City scene in the heyday of the incredible dance band that came out of that region. The two musicians' careers certainly crossed paths, and their lives in New York City also intersected through Abramson and National Records. But in 1954, they came together to create another foundational track of rock and roll. Stone recalled, "In January or February of 1954, Herb Abramson said to me, 'We got Joe Turner coming in to record and we need an up-tempo blues for a change.' I threw a bunch of phonetic phrases together, shake, rattle and roll, flip, flop and fly, and I came up with 30 or 40 verses. Then I picked over them. Shake, Rattle and Roll is a classic 12-bar blues song, set up in a verse-chorus form. The chorus shares the title lyrics, repeating the phrase shake, rattle and roll, with Turner's iconic vocal shouting. It has a laid-back but up-tempo groove, which gives it that danceability that Abramson was looking for.
Shake, rattle, and roll. Shake, rattle, and roll.
The lyrics in the verses are a great example of Hokum blues, a type of blues that has been around for at least a century and which employed clever euphemisms and sexual innuendos. Lines like "make some noise with the pots and pans," or "over the hills and way down underneath," or "a one-eyed cat peeping into a seafood store." I wonder what those could mean.
I like a one-eyed cat peeping in the seafood store.
Stone credits his drummer for the famed one-eyed cat line. I got the line about a one-eyed cat peeping into a seafood store from my drummer. Baby love it. He was always coming up with lines like that. While Turner has been quoted with singing the lyrics exactly as Stone had written them, it is likely he did improvise some phrases, especially the last verse.
I did over the hill, way down underneath.
It's possible the title lyrics were influenced by Turner himself. In their book, What Was the First Rock and Roll Record?, Jim Dawson and Steve Probst explain that, according to several sources, Turner was very likely singing some version of a blues song with the words shake, rattle and roll during World War II. They cite a performance at the Cafe Society in New York in 1943, which lists Shake, Rattle and Roll as a song title on Joe Turner's setlist, over a decade before Stone's version was recorded. However, Turner was known for his ability to improvise blues songs all night, and lyrics about shaking, rattling and rolling were all standard phrases in his repertoire. So Stone possibly had heard Turner singing something along those lines, and in his own brainstorms, the phrase came to mind with a certain level of comfort and familiarity for Turner's voice. Turner himself certainly credits Stone for the whole concept of the song. When it comes to recorded rock history, Stone's songwriting and Turner's performance created the perfect rhythm and blues track to cross over into the pop market, the phenomenon of which we credit for the birth of rock and roll. The music is danceable and the lyrics are appropriately sexual, coded just enough to slip by radio censorship to be heard by a larger mainstream audience.
The emergence of rock and roll coincides with the changing cultural and musical landscape of the mid-50s. The music industry itself was changing, moving away from the model of songwriters and sheet music publishing and recognizing the importance of recorded tracks. Before rock and roll, the music industry was largely focused on three main markets for American popular music: mainstream popular music, country and western, and rhythm and blues. These markets were largely divided along lines of economics and race, more so than even what the music sounded like. Certainly, the rhythm and blues charts boasted a wide range of sounds, from electric blues, doo-wop, and sweet soul, to the more up-tempo blues tracks, which would provide the foundation for rock and roll. Mainstream popular music also had a diverse variety of sounds, but there were some consistent qualities we repeatedly find in this music. These songs tended towards more carefully polished, often orchestrated tracks, which were careful to be made appropriate for the whole family. And if we think about the large number of homes with one family-centered radio, and then later the same scenario with television sets, we can understand that family-friendly emphasis. Rhythm and blues tracks, however, were largely aimed at adult audiences. This music remained regional longer than mainstream pop, and when it did make it to national audiences on the radio, it often held the late-night spots after the children were asleep. Thus, a song like Big Joe Turner's Shake, Rattle, and Roll, with its fairly overt adult references, were aimed very clearly at a different audience than prime-time mainstream radio. However, the mid-50s saw a changing world, one which would bring songs like Shake, Rattle, and Roll to a much wider audience. The civil rights movement brought an increased awareness of music and culture across racial boundaries, and the rise of youth culture, with their increased access to spending money and radios, especially car radios, meant there was a whole new audience eager to consume popular music. But the popular music that they wanted to listen to. And so in the mid-50s, an increasing number of teenagers turned to rhythm and blues records as an exciting and often rebellious musical world, one that was very different from the family-friendly pop songs that their parents would listen to. The upbeat rhythm and blues records were danceable, and the lyrics appealed to their more adult interests. And there was also a rebelliousness for many middle-class white teenagers listening to Black-created music in this era with heightened racial tensions. As wider audiences discovered rhythm and blues records, songs like Shake, Rattle, and Roll began to cross over from the rhythm and blues charts onto the pop charts. New radio shows emerged to match this growing audience. Many of the earliest rock and roll records were covers, which attempted to change the focus of the phrase to dance references, rocking and rolling as the experience of dancing. And this is what we see when Bill Haley covers Joe Turner's Shake, Rattle, and Roll. First of all, his version speeds up the tempo, making it even more dance-friendly. He also cleans up the lyrics to emphasize a more innocent take on the song's meaning. For instance, he changes the first verse lyrics about making noise with the pots and pans and emphasizes a less sexual interpretation. Get out in that kitchen and rattle those pots and pans. We'll roll my breakfast 'cause I'm a hungry man. Most of Turner's most obvious innuendos get removed or changed, except perhaps the most obvious of them all, the one-eyed cat. Somehow, that line managed to get past both Bill Haley and his producer, Mitt Gabler. Finally, while Turner's version has 3 verses full of sexual innuendos before we get to the chorus, and several other verses throughout, Haley's version jumps straight to the chorus of Shake, Rattle, and Roll after every verse. In this arrangement, the emphasis of these title lyrics can be interpreted as much more dance-centered than they could in the original. Although there are many roots to the term, the popularization of the phrase rock and roll is credited to radio DJ Alan Freed. Freed's radio show, The Moondog Show, premiered in 1951, and he employed the term rock and roll records to refer to the rhythm and blues records he was playing for teenage audiences at the time. The term comes from the lyrics in many of these songs, which reference ideas of rocking and rolling as euphemisms for more adult activities. Songs like Sister Rosetta Tharpe's Rock Me, The Dominoes' 60-Minute Man, and Joe Turner's Shake, Rattle, and Roll.
Turner recorded Shake, Rattle, and Roll for Atlantic Records in New York on February the 15th, 1954. Written by Stone, the song is credited to Charles Calhoun, a pseudonym which Stone used so that he could be part of both ASCAP and BMI. Stone explained, "I was trying to belong to both of the performing societies, ASCAP and BMI. I had just bought a home in Hempstead. The guy who had built the house, his name was Charles Calhoun. I had the contract for the house in my hands when Ahmet was saying, 'You've got to pick another name to put on this tune.' And I looked down, and there it was, Charles Calhoun." The song was produced by Ahmet Ertegun and Jerry Wexler. According to Turner, the pair also provided the backing vocals for the chorus. "We didn't have no singers to back me up, so we had the cats in the studio. Atlantic owners, Ahmet Ertegun, Jerry Wexler, and them. They was backing me up singing." Wexler had been brought into Atlantic Records by Ertegun in June of 1953 after Abramson was drafted into the Army in February earlier that year. Wexler's contributions to the incredible hits that came out of Atlantic cannot be overstated. On this song, one of his earliest hits with Atlantic, the team brought in Mickey Baker on guitar, Lloyd Trotman on bass, and Connie Kay on drums. The song's iconic brass part was performed by Wilbur de Paris on trombone, Sam Taylor on tenor sax, and Hayward Henry on baritone sax. Shake, Rattle and Roll was released in April of 1954. Turner's version hit number 1 on the Billboard Rhythm and Blues charts and even crossed over to reach number 22 on the pop charts. Historians and fans alike have argued for decades over the distinction of the first rock and roll record. And while narrowing a massive cultural and musical movement down to one single record is impossible, it is equally unwise to understate the importance of Stone's song and Joe Turner's track in charting the future of rock and roll. Stone's rocked-up blues, with Turner's iconic vocal inflections, combined with the rebellious edge of lyrics not intended for family-friendly listening, Shake, Rattle and Roll was a groundbreaking track of its time, bringing rhythm and blues to larger audiences, and other musicians and record labels took notice. On June the 7th, the same week that Turner's version was dominating the rhythm and blues charts, Decca's rising star Bill Haley recorded his cover version. The Bill Haley and His Comets version would hit number 7 on the Billboard singles charts and held a place in the top 40 for 27 weeks. Elvis Presley recorded his own version in 1956 as a single under RCA. These important early versions of Stone's song also reveal the diverse sounds of rock and roll as it was emerging in the mid-50s. All three took the music in different directions sonically, creating wider awareness for the incredible music coming out of the rhythm and blues charts leading up to this time. And finally, Shake, Rattle and Roll epitomizes the incredible contributions of Jesse Stone to creating the sounds that we now call rock and roll. His influence as a songwriter and arranger have earned him a place in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, in the category of the Ahmet Ertegun Award, recognizing his ability to craft incredible and iconic songs which would cross the color line and bring audiences together. On Stone's 95th birthday, Ertegun read a letter from Jerry Wexler, which outlined his incredible contributions. From your vast experience with jazz, blues, country, in fact, every facet of American root music, you became one of the architects of the new urban music of black folk, the music that came to be known as rhythm and blues. You wrote the tunes and the arrangements, you assembled the players, you ran the rehearsals, you conducted in the studio. It was your own continuing evolution that helped pave the way for the next great cultural tidal wave, rock and roll. Stone was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame by legendary songwriter Carole King.
One of the founders of Atlantic Records, the other being Jerry Wexler, and the founder of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, Ahmet Ertegun, has said, Jesse Stone did more to develop the basic rock and roll sound than anybody else.
Wow, what else can we say? Rhythm and blues, rhythm and blues, is a massive influence on all of us. It's inescapable. And the directness of a song like Shake, Rattle and Roll, and then Bill Haley doing his kind of, nicer, faster, it's a faster version and you can definitely move to it, but, politer version, with the exception of the not getting that line about the one-eyed cat, which is quite comical now when we go back and read it. But I suppose the censors of the day didn't really spot that. The reality is that blues and rhythm and blues is responsible for the music we listen today in so many ways. And it is a massive reason why I love that music and so many of you do, because we go back to it and it seems to be the source. There's a great argument made by Charlie Gillett when he talks about rock and roll and even heavy rock, like early heavy rock, like the Sabbaths and the Deep Purples and Led Zeppelin and Jeff Beck, how they listened just directly to blues. They didn't listen to any of the rock and roll artists. Well, maybe they did, but they studied the blues so heavily to create heavy rock. And then he said, it diluted because the next lot of artists that came along listened to those rock bands, and then the 80s ones listened to the 70s ones. So and it lost a bit of it. And, many people have argued, and I don't disagree, that the further we get away from the source, Music becomes more sterile. And if you're out there trying to create something fresh and new, of course, listen to what's current. But how about going back to the source, going back to blues, going back to rhythm and blues? And it's hard to understate just how out of touch at a period of time people were with that music. Dave Pensado told me a great story about how he was at school in Florida and a friend of his, this is in the mid-60s, came up to him holding a Rolling Stones record and said to him, "Dave, have you heard about this new music from England? It's called rhythm and blues." And that's just crazy, when you think back to the 60s, the 50s and the 60s, and obviously the 40s and before, radio was just playing one genre of music. So if you wanted to listen to just rock and roll in the 50s and 60s, you might not have ever realized that you were listening to recut versions of classic rhythm and blues songs, like Shake, Rattle and Roll. But we live in a world now where we can go back and we can see all of the influence and see where it came from. And I just really, if you're not knowledgeable about this genre and this time period in particular, go back and discover some more about it. It's incredibly inspirational to listen to where the music that we love came from. So Jesse Stone, Joe Turner, thank you ever so much for creating such amazing music. And Ahmet Ertegun and Jerry Wexler, thank you as well for being able to showcase this and bring it to a wider audience. Thanks everybody for watching. I really, really appreciate it. Please leave any comments and questions below. I always love hearing, well, first of all, any other ideas for songs that you want us to talk about. I love being able to do this. This is really, I'm very passionate about this. I love being able to talk about great music. So thank you everybody that watches this and supports it. Obviously, we don't make any money from these, and that's okay. And when we play the clips, the monetization usually goes back to the artist or the record company or the songwriter. And you know what? That's okay. I'm perfectly happy with them being rewarded for their incredible talents. Thanks, everyone. So long, farewell, auf Wiedersehen, au revoir, adios, tschüss, tutzins, ciao, goodbye.